More than 120,000 Catholics in East Texas are mourning the death of the first pope from the Americas. They're also praying and preparing for the next leader of the Catholic Church as well. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us right here for this special edition of East Texas in Focus tonight. I'm Nolan Hoffman. Tonight we are focusing on the life and legacy of the People's Pope, Pope Francis. The 266th pontiff of the Catholic Church has now been laid to rest. He died on Easter Monday. The frail Pope making a surprise appearance the day before at St. Peter's Square for the celebration of Easter Mass. It was his final goodbye to the world. Francis died a few hours later. According to a death certificate issued by the Vatican, the Pope died of a stroke that prompted irreversible heart failure. The announcement of his death touching the hearts of more than 1.4 billion Catholics on the planet, top world leaders, and everyone who believed in the power of love, prayer, and service. Pope Francis was 88 years old at the time of his death. Dina Baer has a look back at the life of an extraordinary man.
Habemus Papa.
In an historic conclave, not after the death of a pope, but instead the retirement of Pope Benedict XVI, the doors closed inside the Sistine Chapel. 155 voting cardinals in place. Outside, a steady, driving rain. The faithful faltered and left St. Peter's Square. That is, until the white smoke drew them back. As the bells echoed through Vatican City, the sounds of people screaming in different languages. White.
È una fumata bianca, bianca, bianca.
Massive monitors brought the smokestack into focus. Hope after just a day and a half.
Ecco, ci siamo arrivati, eh?
People flooded back to St. Peter's as the clouds cleared, highlighting tears of joy. Then a bit of confusion.
Sancte Romani Ecclesiae Cardinalem Bergoglio.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the cardinal from Argentina, was the new pope, choosing the name Francis, an homage to St. Francis of Assisi, who mentored the poor. He spoke softly.
Buonasera.
A greeting in Italian. The crowd may not have known Cardinal Bergoglio, but in an instant fell in love with Pope Francis as he asked them to pray for him.
Pregate per me.
Prayer was often on the mind of Jorge Bergoglio growing up, even though he came later to the priesthood. Born and raised in a middle-class suburb of Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario grew up with 4 siblings. His parents, Mario, a railway worker, and Regina Maria, a housewife, were of Italian descent. He began his career as a chemist, but soon switched course to the seminary. An intellectual, he taught literature, philosophy, and theological studies in Argentina. He penned a book with his overriding philosophy in the title, True Power is in Service. He was ordained a priest at age 33. Then Pope John Paul II named him assistant bishop in Buenos Aires. 5 years later, archbishop, with his elevation to cardinal in 2001. But as he rose to the top, his lifestyle remained firmly grounded. Instead of living in the bishop's luxury residence, he chose a simple apartment where he cooked his own meals and navigated the city using public transportation. As Pope, Francis chose casual vestments, wearing his old pectoral cross from Argentina, shunning gold for a gold-plated fisherman's ring, and never wearing the customary papal red shoes, instead wanting to walk with the people as he led his flock. He cared for the sick, each year visiting hospitals, AIDS hospice, and prisons, washing the feet of the ill. In his first journey through St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis stopped for a sick man, an image hearkening back to Christ, embracing the poor and ill. He held babies as the people held him up as the man who would make a difference.
I vescovi, I sacerdoti, I diaconi.
The climate changed for the Vatican with this new pontiff and his independent style. From the night he was elected, he hopped on a bus with his fellow cardinals, rejecting the private luxury car reserved for the Pope. And the next morning, without a security detail or a limo, he jumped in a VW and went out among the people. and the people had high expectations that he would right the wrongs of the church from sexual and financial wrongdoing.
Per mettere a fuoco il cuore degli eventi di questi giorni.
In a first, he faced the media on day one, challenging reporters to join him in the Trinity, a pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. In his early moves as Pope, he both shocked, angered, and embraced. First, making the church more inclusive to women and LGBT+ people. Conservatives were not happy. Liberals complained he didn't do enough. He promoted women in the church, but refused to ordain them. He maintained he was trying to be inclusive.
Un cordiale saludo para todos los participantes del Congreso.
And a tone. He convened a special meeting to directly address what can only be described as a crisis in the Catholic Church: sexual abuse by clergy. The man, known for compassion and kindness, had a reputation for being tough on clergy.
That is something that I think the Holy Father's committed to.
Chicago's Cardinal Blaise Cupich, a Pope Francis appointee, took center stage in efforts to repair.
And covering up the scandal to protect perpetrators and the institution.
He criticized war and taught peace. He championed for the environment and strove to make the preachings of the church more simplistic and understandable. Although always in precarious health, with part of a lung removed in his 20s, for a decade, the Holy Father still traveled on 45 international trips to Brazil, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, South Korea, France, Turkey, Bosnia, Peru, Africa, Iraq, Poland, Cuba, and the U.S.
Ambedue sono contro la vita.
Recently, the U.S. leadership, most especially policies regarding immigration, was a target for the Pope as he spoke out harshly against treating people inhumanely. Though counseled by his doctors to rest, the Pope pressed on until at 88, bronchitis, then a polymicrobial infection and bilateral pneumonia left him bedridden in the hospital. And now, after Pope Francis took his final breath, as the faithful mourn, a look back on his first words to all as Holy Father, a prayer, then a send-off.
Buonanotte e buon riposo.
Good night, and have a good rest in peace.
Well, certainly a remarkable and inspirational life indeed. When we return tonight, reaction from East Texans to the Pope's death. We also hear from the Bishop of the Diocese of Tyler about the life and legacy of the Pontiff. You're watching a special edition of East Texas in Focus, Francis, the People's Pope. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Tonight we are focusing on the life, legacy, and lessons from Francis, the People's Pope. After 12 years as head of the global Catholic Church, the Pontiff died after a series of health issues. After finding out about his death, East Texas faithful also honoring the life of Pope Francis. Rachel Davis shows us how local devout Catholics remember the Pontiff.
I was just surprised because I really thought that he was doing better.
Hours after the Vatican announced the passing of Pope Francis,
alle ore 7:35,
Bishop Greg Kelly leading Easter Monday's midday Mass in Tyler and offering his homily to the life and legacy of the Pontiff.
His attention was on the person who was discarded, the person whose dignity was being disrespected, who nobody thought counted.
Bishop Kelly spoke about the teachings Francis leaves behind, touching on his love and devotion of the Blessed Virgin Mother Mary, guiding the Church through a global pandemic, and his focus on the poor and most marginalized.
Speaking to the whole world about us all being in the same boat. And I think that just impacted me very much.
It was a somber day for East Texans attending Mass, still in shock of the news of his passing.
we decided with our mom that we were going to try and go to Mass today to pray for his soul.
Now grieving and praying for the late Pope, Catholic Church, and cardinals who are tasked with choosing the next successor of Peter's throne.
To church to remember him and offer and pray for his soul so that he can go to heaven with Jesus, basically.
A global church saddened by the passing of their leader and awaiting a centuries-old process to elect his successor.
He really said that we have an anchor, we have a cross, we have a hope.
And we recently had the opportunity to sit down with Bishop Greg Kelly. Bishop Kelly was appointed last December to lead the Diocese of Tyler by Pope Francis. He joined us to talk about the life and legacy of the pontiff and his teachings to the world, his deep connection with the weak and vulnerable, and the model of humility he lived. Here's part of that conversation. Hearing the news on Monday morning that Pope Francis passed away, when did you exactly find out, and what was going through your mind when you found out the news?
You know, it was right before 5 o'clock on Monday morning. I woke up and I looked at my phone, and there was a text message from a priest that I knew from the Diocese of Dallas, where I was until 2 months ago, and it was the time of when it was 3:39. It said Pope Francis had died. I said, oh my. You know, it really came as a surprise, because he seemed like, you know, after being in the hospital so long, that he was doing much better, and that he was very active on Easter Sunday. He'd met with the Vice President. He went around St. Peter's Square. You know, it looked like he was resuming some of his normal activities. So it came as a surprise. Yeah.
Over the years, did you get to actually meet Pope Francis in person?
Well, you know, it was he who appointed me auxiliary bishop of Dallas at the end of 2015. I was ordained in 2016, and one of the requirements for a new bishop is they go to bishop school. And so it's a week-long formation process in Rome, and on the Friday of that week is an audience with Pope Francis, and each bishop gets to walk up and actually meet him personally. So that's the only time I actually met him in person, and he was just very warm and ingratiating, you know, beautiful smile. Yeah. Yeah.
What made Pope Francis such a charming figure during his tenure as the leader of the Catholic Church?
You know, it was just these gestures. I mean, he would do these dramatic gestures. Like when he was first elected Pope, he wanted his first trip to go to the island of Lampedusa, where a lot of immigrants from Africa, you know, coming across the Mediterranean in insufficient boats were drowning. And he had such a heart for immigrants, that people who had to be on the move for whatever reason, and he wanted to go there, and his staff kept kind of putting him off. And one of them got a call from the Italian Airlines saying that they had received a call from a Jorge Bergoglio, you know, with his name, booking 4 seats on a commercial flight to Lampedusa. He was just going to go himself, you know, and so that's when they went. That was his first trip, and he went down there. You know, I mean, washing the feet of prisoners every Holy Thursday. I mean, wandering off into the crowd at Rio de Janeiro. I think he was a nightmare for his security detail, because he just wanted to be close to people, and you know, he really paid very much attention to each individual person. Yeah.
What were some moments throughout the years personally to you that stuck out about Pope Francis and everything he did as the leader of the Catholic Church?
The one more than any other one is that during the pandemic, March 27th of 2020, you know, he's standing there in his white outfit in a completely empty St. Peter's Square, which would normally just be packed. Yeah. And it was a rainy night. It was wet on the pavement, and he's talking about, you know, the gospel where Jesus is asleep in the boat with his disciples, and he wants us, you know, the pandemic, he says, is teaching us that we're all in the same boat. That, you know, that we can't decide that some people don't count, and that a lot of the people that really counted during the pandemic were people who just very ordinary firefighters, policemen, nurses, chaplains, you know, restaurant workers, you know, that were just keeping the very basic things going, caring for sick people. And he really, I mean, that's just the image more than any other one that stands out for me. Yeah.
Personally, what inspired you about Pope Francis that maybe made you and others around you better Catholics?
I think his kind of position is that the first, I mean, to really, that we need to be a church that goes out. You know, not just simply waiting for people to come to the church or kind of taking care of ourselves, but the church has a mission to the world. And especially, he always talked about going out to the peripheries, and not just to the physical peripheries, but also people who, for whatever reason, were kind of on the edges of things, and the poor, immigrants, the elderly. He just had a special care for upholding the dignity of each person. Yeah.
During his tenure, what do you think changed in the Catholic Church with his time as the pontiff?
I really think it's that more than anything. He very much emphasized in the latest synod, which is an international meeting after the Second Vatican Council. There'd be a synod of bishops every 3 years. He broadened that to include priests, lay people, religious. He wanted us to be a church that talked to each other, that encountered each other, and then in the midst of that understood the mission of the church better. It didn't affect the doctrine, but it really affected more like the manner of the church engaging the world, and because it's ultimately the Holy Spirit that changes hearts. Mm-hmm.
As thousands of people right now are lining up to pay their respects to Pope Francis there at the Vatican, what does that say about the Catholic faithful right now, for definitely the legacy of Pope Francis, how he was able to inspire a lot of people around the world?
Mm-hmm. I think first of all, he's our father.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1.4 billion people in the world, I think, that are Catholic, and he's our father. And it's a big family, and big families oftentimes have struggles or differences, and yet he's our father. And he passed away, and we pray for him, and we express gratitude. We think about him, and and just what he did and what he accomplished.
How do you think Pope Francis is going to be remembered? I know it might be a hard question to answer this morning.
I think that he will be remembered again for the gestures that spoke of the substance of his attention, which was to, he said that we have a lack of a plan that includes everybody, and that he wanted, whether it was, and for us to be a good Samaritan church, that we bind up the wounds of other people.
Now that Pope Francis has been laid to rest comes the monumental task of 135 cardinals from around the world to choose who will be the next person to sit on Peter's throne. It's a process that is centuries old and done in secrecy. When we return tonight, Bishop Kelly gives us his thoughts on the upcoming conclave. Stay with us. Now that Pope Francis has died, the wheels are in motion to elect a replacement. What does that process look like, and who might be under consideration? Well, Keir Simmons has much more on the next steps in the process of electing the new pope, the conclave, and the likely contenders.
The customs of the Catholic Church are clear and carefully orchestrated. Once the period of mourning is done, the centuries-old tradition to elect a new pope, known as the conclave and shrouded in secrecy, gets underway. Over the next 2 weeks, cardinals under the age of 80 from across the globe will descend on Vatican City, holding a series of formal meetings known as general congregations, and more informal, direct conversations too.
And keep in mind that cardinals are human beings, they're political animals as well. They will be meeting in various places. Cardinal X will say to Cardinal Y, I've been talking about this to Cardinal Z, let's go have a pizza.
It all comes down to the voting. A process so fascinating, so mysterious, it's been recreated in the blockbuster hit Conclave.
We're about to choose the most famous man in the world.
And 1.25 billion souls watching.
The word conclave comes from Latin, meaning locked, with a key. The cardinals are sealed inside the Sistine Chapel, as Michelangelo's frescoes bear witness. No phones, no electronics of any kind, not even any notes. After day one, there are 4 rounds of secret ballots every day, until one name receives a 2/3 majority. Back in 2013, Francis was elected after just 2 days. And this year, the list swirling of likely contenders who may be pontiff material spans the globe, from Asia to Africa to the Holy Land to Europe and Canada. Will the next pope be someone close to Francis, set to continue his legacy, or a more conservative voice set on pulling back Francis's progressive agenda?
Also, age is very important. The Vatican is a very strange place because someone who is 65 or 70 is considered too young. Very few cardinals want another papacy that lasts another 30 years.
As the secret voting continues, the cardinals burn the ballots twice a day, and the masses outside await the smoke. Black smoke means no pope yet, and white smoke
Habemus Papam
announces a pope has been chosen.
And again, that was Keir Simmons reporting for us. The person who was ultimately chosen as Pope will lead the Catholic Church into the future. They possess significant authority establishing matters of faith and morals and in the governance of the Church, including selecting church leaders. We continue our conversation with Bishop Kelly tonight, who was chosen by Pope Francis to lead the Diocese of Tyler, about what's next for the Church in the world and here at home. What kind of qualities do you think the Catholic Church is now looking for as they pick the next Pope?
You know, I think it's someone that can build on the legacy of Pope Francis. I think somebody, you know, he was the first Pope in forever and ever to come from South America, you know, from the global South, and so much more of the Church, you know, a lot of the numbers, the energy of the Church is in South America and Africa, and I think, you know, somebody that's sensitive to the needs of those local churches as well as the Church throughout the world.
Personally, what do you want to see when it comes to qualities in the next Pope?
I mean, I think somebody who is a pastor. You know, I mean, I think that Pope Francis is very much a pastor. I mean, and he was, you know, attentive to individuals. He really thought, you know, his very first work, The Joy of the Gospel, was really a work of how do we preach the gospel? How do we get this word out in a way that people can understand it and take it in?
Finally, when can the world expect to hear the name of the new Pope?
You know, when he's elected. I mean, I think it's, you know, they take 4 ballots a day once they start gathering. It's a very, you know, enclosed process in the Sistine Chapel, and I think, you know, I forget the name of the man who comes out on the balcony and says, Habemus Papam, we have a Pope. I think that's when we'll know.
The conclave is expected to begin in the next few days and is required to start 15 to 20 days after the Pope's death. Coming up after the break tonight, one final message. We'll be right back. Well, in 12 years as leader of the Catholic Church, Francis sealed his legacy as a reformer who challenged tradition, a pastor who forged a deep connection with the weak and vulnerable, and a model of humility. Beloved for his compassion for the sick, poor, and forgotten, also focusing the Church on what he believed was its mission to spread love and mercy. A pontiff who touched millions around the world, who will be remembered for practicing what he preached and as the people's Pope. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this special edition of East Texas in Focus. We'll see you next time.